Fleet Commander Zarketh stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Triumph, and watched the stars streak past the viewport. He felt the familiar surge of pride that came with commanding such power. Behind his vessel, 200 warships followed in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the purple and gold colors of the Krenthax Empire. This fleet had broken worlds. It had scattered enemy armadas like leaves in a storm, and today, it would add another easy victory to the Empire's long list of conquests. The target system appeared on the tactical display, glowing a soft blue. Intelligence reports called it Sol. The species living there called themselves humans. Zarketh's data analysts had studied their primitive transmissions, their simple satellites, their clumsy chemical rockets. These creatures had barely crawled out of their home system. They possessed fusion drives that the Krenthax had abandoned as obsolete 5 centuries ago. Their weapons were kinetic slugs and explosive missiles, the tools of savages who hadn't discovered plasma containment or particle acceleration. It would be a simple operation. Show overwhelming force, demand surrender, integrate their world into the Empire. The humans would provide labor, resources, perhaps even a few curiosities for the Imperial museums. Zarketh had performed this dance 100 times before with 100 different species. "Commander, we are entering the outer boundary of the human territory," his navigation officer announced, her voice crisp and professional. "Maintain course," Zarketh replied. "Deploy scouts. Standard intimidation formation." The fleet spread out, creating a wall of ships that would fill the sensors of anyone watching. It was a display designed to crush hope, to make resistance seem pointless. Zarketh settled into his command throne and waited for the inevitable distress signals, the panicked broadcasts, the desperate pleas for mercy, but something felt wrong. "Commander," the sensor officer said slowly, "we have a single contact, bearing 347, range 200,000 kilometers. One ship?" Zarketh leaned forward. "They send one ship against a full fleet? Are these humans completely insane?" "Sir, I'm having difficulty getting a clear reading." The contact keeps shifting. "It's almost like our sensors can't decide what they're looking at." "It's a stealth system," Zarketh said dismissively. "A crude one. They're trying to hide their ship's true signature. Bring us into visual range. I want to see what passes for a warship among these primitives." The Eternal Triumph moved forward, the rest of the fleet holding position. Zarketh expected to see something small and desperate. A last-ditch defender making a brave but futile stand. What appeared on the main view screen made him sit up straight in his throne. The human ship was enormous. It dwarfed the Eternal Triumph by a factor of 3, a massive wedge of dark gray metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But it wasn't the size that made Zarketh's skin prickle with unease. It was the condition of the vessel. The hull was covered in scars. Deep gouges ran along its flanks. Sections of armor plating looked newer than others, clearly replaced after taking damage. Burns and impacts marked nearly every surface. This wasn't a pristine warship fresh from a shipyard. This was a vessel that had seen combat, real combat, again and again and again, and it was still flying. "What kind of ship is that?" Zarketh muttered. His tactical officer worked her console frantically. "I can't classify it, Commander. It doesn't match any known configuration. The power readings are... I don't understand these numbers. They shouldn't be possible from a vessel that size." The human battleship hung in space, not advancing, not retreating, just waiting. There was something deeply unsettling about its stillness. It reminded Zarketh of the way a predator watches its prey before striking. "Open a channel," Zarketh ordered. "Let's get this over with." The communications officer worked her controls. "Channel open, sir." Zarketh straightened his uniform and prepared to deliver the standard speech. He would offer them one chance to surrender, to accept the protection and guidance of the Krenthax Empire. They would refuse out of foolish pride. Then he would destroy their ship and move on to their homeworld. "Attention, human vessel," Zarketh began. "You stand before the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet of the Krenthax Empire. You are outmatched and surrounded. Power down your weapons and prepare to receive boarding parties. Resistance will result in your immediate destruction. You have one standard cycle to comply." Silence answered him. The human ship remained motionless. Then a voice came through the speakers and Zarketh felt his confidence waver for the first time in his long career. It was a female voice, calm and relaxed, almost amused. "Krenthax vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the TDS Indomitable. I appreciate the offer, really, but I think you might want to reconsider who's surrendering to whom. Laughter rippled through Zarketh's bridge crew. The audacity of it was almost refreshing. These humans had courage, at least. Foolish courage, but courage nonetheless. You find this amusing? Zarketh said coldly. You face 200 warships with a single vessel. What possible delusion makes you think you have any chance of survival? 207 ships, actually, Captain Chen corrected. Your scout vessels are hanging back at about 500,000 kilometers. And as for delusions, well, I'd say the delusional one is whoever sent an entire fleet to intimidate a species they know nothing about. Zarketh's amusement evaporated. How did she know about the scouts? They were running silent, their emissions contained, unless human sensors were far more advanced than the intelligence report suggested. I grow tired of this, Zarketh said. Weapons, prepare a warning shot. Target the space 300 meters off their bow. Let's show these primitives what real power looks like. Firing solution locked, Commander. Fire. A lance of superheated plasma erupted from the Eternal Triumph's main gun. It was a weapon that could vaporize a city block in an instant. The concentrated fury of a captive star given form and direction. The beam crossed the distance between the ships in less than a second and struck the Indomitable. Zarketh expected to see the beam pass by the human ship as intended. Close enough to make them feel its heat. Far enough to avoid actual damage. Instead, the plasma beam hit something invisible around the human vessel and simply vanished. It didn't explode. It didn't scatter. It was absorbed, dissipated, neutralized as if it had never existed. What just happened? Zarketh demanded. Sir, they have some kind of defensive field. It's not like our shields. This is something different. It's absorbing energy instead of deflecting it. That's impossible. The power requirements alone would... Commander, the sensor officer interrupted, her voice tight with fear. The human ship is painting us with active targeting systems. Multiple systems. I count at least 40 different weapon locks on our position. The main view screen changed. Instead of just showing the Indomitable, it now displayed a data transmission the humans were broadcasting openly. It showed the entire Krenthax fleet, each ship highlighted and tagged with identification codes, weapons capabilities, and shield strength. It was their own tactical data, the kind of information that should have been secure, displayed for anyone to see. Captain Chen's voice came through the speakers again, and this time there was no amusement in it. Commander Zarketh, you've made 2 mistakes today. First, you assumed we were primitives. Second, you fired on a Terran defense ship. I'm going to give you 1 chance to turn your fleet around and leave this sector, because if you don't, you're going to learn a very expensive lesson about why humanity doesn't need 200 ships to make a point. Zarketh stared at the scarred hull of the Indomitable and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service, cold creeping doubt. Zarketh felt his face flush with anger. The human captain dared to threaten him, dared to speak to a fleet commander of the Krenthax Empire as if he were some minor pirate. The sheer arrogance of it ignited something hot and dangerous in his chest. You want a lesson? Zarketh snarled. Then I will teach you one. All ships weapons free. Show these primitives what happens when they insult the Empire. His tactical officer hesitated. Sir, we don't know what capabilities they possess. Perhaps we should... Are you questioning my orders? No, sir. All ships opening fire. The space between the fleets erupted with light. Plasma beams, particle lances, and missile swarms launched from 200 warships simultaneously. It was enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. The combined assault converged on the Indomitable from every angle, a sphere of death that nothing could possibly survive. Zarketh watched the view screen, waiting for the human ship to break apart, to explode, to simply cease existing under that overwhelming barrage. But the Indomitable didn't die. Its defensive fields flared into visibility, a shimmering barrier that wrapped around the hull like a second skin. The plasma beams hit the field and splashed across it like water against stone. The particle weapons scattered and dissipated, and the missiles never even reached the ship. Hundreds of small turrets emerged from the Indomitable's hull, tracking the incoming missiles with inhuman precision. They fired in rapid bursts, small projectiles that moved too fast for Zarketh's sensors to track properly. Every missile that entered range simply exploded, torn apart by the point defense network before it could detonate. In 3 seconds, over 500 missiles became clouds of expanding debris. Sir, their defense system is operating on a level we can't match, the tactical officer reported, her voice shaking. The tracking speed alone suggests computer systems far beyond our own. And those shields, they're still at full strength despite the bombardment. Then we hit them harder, Zarketh growled. Double the power output. All ships maximum firepower. The assault intensified. Every weapon in the Krenthax fleet fired at once, again and again, pouring enough energy into the human ship to boil an ocean. The Indomitable sat in the center of that storm of destruction, unmoving and undamaged. Then it fired back. Zarketh didn't even see the projectile. One moment, the destroyer Relentless Fury was advancing on the Indomitable's flank. The next moment, something traveling at an impossible speed punched straight through the destroyer's shields as if they didn't exist. The kinetic impact was catastrophic. The destroyer's hull crumpled, folded in on itself, and then tore apart as the projectile's momentum carried it completely through the ship and out the other side. Secondary explosions ripped through the dying vessel. Atmosphere vented into space. Power cores detonated. In less than 5 seconds, a warship that had served the Empire for 50 years became an expanding field of wreckage. The shock wave from the destroyer's death caught 3 nearby ships, buckling their shields and sending them spinning out of formation. What was that? Zarketh shouted. What kind of weapon was that? A solid projectile, sir, the sensor officer said, her voice barely above a whisper. A metal slug. No warhead. No energy discharge. Just mass accelerated to 0.3 light speed. The kinetic energy alone. She trailed off, but Zarketh understood. The humans had weaponized simple physics on a scale that made energy weapons look wasteful. A railgun, then, but one powered by systems that could accelerate massive projectiles to relativistic speeds. The amount of energy required was staggering. All ships evasive maneuvers, Zarketh ordered. Random pattern Delta. The fleet scattered, breaking formation to present harder targets. It was a retreat in all but name, and every officer on the bridge knew it. The Indomitable began to move. It didn't lurch or strain against inertia. It simply accelerated smoothly and quickly as if gravity itself had no hold on it. The scarred battleship cut through space like a blade, pursuing the fleeing Krenthax vessels with terrible inevitability. And as it moved, it fired again, and again, and again. Each railgun shot was perfectly aimed. A cruiser tried to hide behind an asteroid and was hit anyway, the projectile punching through the rock and the ship in a single shot. A frigate attempted to boost away at maximum speed and was overtaken, struck from behind and torn in half. A dreadnought raised its shields to maximum and charged directly at the Indomitable, only to have its bridge section removed by a precision shot that left the rest of the ship drifting and powerless. But the railguns weren't the only weapons the humans deployed. As Zarketh watched in growing horror, the Indomitable released swarms of small objects from launch bays along its hull. They looked like missiles at first, but they moved with independent intelligence, adjusting their courses and coordinating with each other in ways that suggested actual consciousness. Drones, his tactical officer said. Autonomous attack drones. The drones ignored the Krenthax weapons fire. They were too small, too fast, and too numerous for the fleet's targeting systems to handle. They swarmed over the nearest destroyer like insects, attaching themselves to the hull. Then they exploded, but these weren't normal explosions. The detonations were focused, directed, designed to disable specific systems. Shield generators failed. Weapon batteries went dark. Engine sections went critical. The destroyer didn't explode. It was systematically disassembled, reduced to a helpless hulk floating dead in space. More ships fell. A light cruiser vanished in a flash of light when something the humans called a torpedo phased directly through its shields and detonated inside its reactor core. 2 frigates collided when their navigation systems were hijacked by some kind of electronic attack. Their computers suddenly convinced they needed to occupy the same space at the same time. Through it all, Captain Chen's voice remained on the open channel, calm and almost conversational. You're losing ships at a rate of approximately 1 every 20 seconds, Commander. At this pace, your fleet will be combat ineffective in about 40 minutes. I'd recommend retreat, but I suppose that would damage your pride. Shut down that transmission, Zarketh ordered. I can't, sir. It's broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. She's overriding our communications. Zarketh watched another of his ships die, this one covered in some kind of gray substance that seemed to eat through the hull plating like acid. Where did the humans get these weapons? What kind of wars had they fought to develop such devastating tools? Sir, we've lost 30% of the fleet, his tactical officer reported. Morale is breaking. Several ships are requesting permission to withdraw. Zarketh looked at the Indomitable. It sat among the wreckage of his fleet, its hull still scarred and battered, its weapons still firing with mechanical precision. And it hadn't even used its main guns yet. Those massive barrels that ran along the ship's spine remained silent, as if the humans were saving them for something more important. The realization hit Zarketh like a physical blow. They were playing with him, testing his fleet, cataloging their weapons and tactics. The Indomitable could have destroyed them all in the first minutes of combat, but it was taking its time, learning everything it could about Krenthax military capabilities. Full retreat, Zarketh said quietly. All ships, maximum speed, scatter pattern. Make for the jump point, sir. Do it now! The order went out. The surviving ships of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet abandoned all formation and fled in every direction, desperate to escape the nightmare that hunted them. Over half of Zarketh's command was already destroyed or disabled. The rest ran for their lives, and the Indomitable followed, not hurrying, simply maintaining a steady pursuit. It picked off the slowest ships, the damaged ones, the ones that couldn't quite reach escape velocity. It didn't chase the entire fleet. It didn't need to. Captain Chen's voice came through one final time before the Eternal Triumph reached the jump point. Commander Zarketh, you're being allowed to escape. You need to deliver a message to your empire. Humanity has claimed this sector. Any further incursions will not be met with a single battleship. You'll face the full Terran defense fleet. Run along now, and thank whatever gods you worship that were feeling merciful today. Zarketh's ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, fleeing into the safety of hyperspace. As the stars stretched and the human system disappeared behind them, the long-range sensors picked up new contacts entering the system. 30 massive ships, each one broadcasting the same distinctive signature as the Indomitable. The reinforcements that had been waiting just outside sensor range, ready to intervene if their single battleship had needed help. Zarketh realized with cold certainty that the Indomitable hadn't been their frontline warship. It had been their scout. The journey back to the Krenthax homeworld took 14 days. For Zarketh, every hour of that trip was torture. He sat in his quarters, staring at the after-action reports, replaying the sensor logs over and over. No matter how many times he watched, the outcome never changed. His fleet had been destroyed by a single human vessel. 52 ships lost. Another 31 so badly damaged they had to be scuttled before making the jump to hyperspace. Thousands of crew members dead or missing. And all Zarketh had to show for it was a handful of sensor recordings and his own survival. The Eternal Triumph limped into orbit around Krenthax Prime with the other battered survivors. Zarketh received his summons to appear before the High Conclave within an hour of arrival. He knew what was coming: disgrace, court-martial, perhaps, even execution for losing so many ships on what should have been a simple scouting mission. The Conclave chamber was a massive dome of crystal and metal that floated above the Imperial Palace. Inside, 12 members of the ruling council sat on thrones arranged in a circle. At the center stood a single pedestal where those called to account would present their testimony. Zarketh walked to the pedestal with his head high. If he was going to be punished, he would face it with dignity. Fleet Commander Zarketh, the High Counselor began, his voice echoing through the chamber. You departed Krenthax Prime with 207 warships. You return with barely a quarter of that number. You were tasked with simple reconnaissance of a primitive species. Instead, you suffered the worst military defeat in recent Imperial history. Explain yourself. Zarketh had prepared a full report, but as he stood before the conclave, he realized that simple facts wouldn't capture the truth of what had happened. These counselors had never faced the Indomitable. They hadn't felt the cold terror of watching their weapons fail, their ships die, their tactical superiority evaporate like morning mist. The intelligence reports were wrong, Zarketh said simply. The humans are not primitive. They are far beyond us in military technology. Murmurs rippled through the conclave. One counselor, a war-scarred veteran named Krenthax, leaned forward. You expect us to believe that a species we discovered only months ago somehow surpasses the Krenthax Empire? We who have conquered 1,000 worlds? I expect you to review the sensor logs, Zarketh replied. Everything is there. Their weapons, their defenses, their tactics. See for yourself. The conclave went silent as the tactical recordings played on holographic displays throughout the chamber. Zarketh watched the counselors' expressions change as they witnessed the battle. Disbelief became confusion. Confusion became concern. Concern became fear. When the recording ended, the chamber remained quiet for a long moment. "This is genuine?" High Counselor Vekamar asked quietly. "Unaltered?" "Verified by 3 independent teams," Zarketh confirmed. "Every byte of data has been analyzed. It's all real." Another counselor, the chief scientist Pelrin, spoke up. Her voice was thoughtful, analytical. "I want to examine these recordings in detail. The technology they display is remarkable. Those defensive fields, the way they manipulated gravitational forces, the precision of their targeting systems. This is not simply advanced technology. This is an entirely different approach to warfare." "Different how?" Krenthax demanded. "We build our weapons around energy manipulation," Pelrin explained. "Plasma, particles, directed radiation. We've pursued this path for millennia. But the humans have focused on kinetic force, on information warfare, on automated systems. Where we use brute power, they use precision and efficiency, and their results are devastatingly effective. Then we match them," Krenthax said. "We study their technology and adapt it for ourselves." "That would take decades," Pelrin countered. "Perhaps centuries. You can't simply copy an entire technological philosophy. Every advancement they've made builds on previous innovations we never pursued. We would have to start from the beginning." The High Counselor raised a hand for silence. "Fleet Commander Zarketh, the human captain allowed you to escape." "Why?" "She said I needed to deliver a message. That humanity claims the sector around their homeworld and will not tolerate further incursions." "And if we sent our full armada, 3,000 ships instead of 200? Zarketh thought about those 30 battleships he'd detected entering the system as he fled. He thought about the casual way Captain Chen had dismantled his fleet, as if it were a training exercise rather than real combat. "Then I believe we would lose 3,000 ships," Zarketh said quietly, "and possibly provide the humans with a reason to go on the offensive." The chamber erupted into argument. Some counselors demanded immediate military response. Others called for caution and negotiation. A few suggested abandoning the sector entirely, ceding the territory to the humans without further conflict. Krenthax's voice cut through the chaos. "The Empire does not retreat. We do not surrender territory to anyone. If these humans want war, then we will give them war on a scale they cannot imagine." "And what will that accomplish?" Pelrin asked sharply. "Pride, glory, dead soldiers. I've analyzed the human ship's capabilities. If their entire fleet possesses similar technology, we cannot defeat them through conventional warfare." "Then what do you suggest?" the High Counselor asked. "First, we learn everything we can about them," Pelrin said. "Not just their technology, but their culture, their history, their motivations. We need to understand how a species develops such advanced weapons. Second, we attempt diplomatic contact. If they're willing to allow survivors and send messages, they might be open to negotiation. And third, we prepare our defenses. If war comes, we need to be ready, but we should not be the ones to start it." The debate continued for hours. Zarketh stood at the center answering questions, providing details, defending his decisions. Finally, as the day wore on, the High Counselor called for a vote. The decision was split, but the moderates won. The Empire would send covert intelligence teams to learn more about humanity. They would prepare a diplomatic mission, and they would quietly mobilize the Imperial Armada, positioning it near human space but not crossing the boundary. It was a compromise that satisfied no one, but it was the best the fractured conclave could manage. As the session ended and the counselors departed, Pelrin approached Zarketh. "Walk with me." "Commander," she said. They left the chamber and moved through the palace gardens, a carefully maintained ecosystem that showcased plants from 100 conquered worlds. "You saw something out there," Pelrin said. It wasn't a question. "Something the sensors didn't capture." Zarketh nodded slowly. "Their ship, the Indomitable. It was covered in battle damage, old scars from countless fights, but it was still operational, still effective. These weren't conquests they survived. These were wars. Wars against whom?" "That's what terrifies me," Zarketh admitted. "They didn't develop those weapons to fight us. They already had them. They built them to fight someone else. Or something else." Or he paused, the realization making him feel cold. "Or each other." Pelrin stopped walking. "You think they fought among themselves?" "I think they've been fighting for a very long time. Those weapons, those tactics, The way their captain barely seemed concerned about facing 200 warships. That level of skill doesn't come from peaceful exploration. It comes from experience, from necessity, from survival. Then we need to know their history, Pelrin said firmly. If humanity has been at war with itself, we need to understand what kind of conflicts would drive them to such technological heights. Over the following weeks, Krenthax intelligence teams worked tirelessly. They intercepted human data transmissions. They analyzed captured databases from automated relay stations. They pieced together fragments of information from 1,000 sources. What they discovered horrified the conclave even more than the battle recordings. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire recorded history. Thousands of years of conflict, from primitive weapons to nuclear arsenals to the advanced systems they possessed now. They had developed their military technology not through academic research, but through desperate innovation during countless conflicts. The reports detailed human wars, global conflicts that killed millions, cold wars where entire civilizations lived under the threat of extinction, proxy battles fought on distant colonies, civil wars that tore apart political structures. Humanity had refined the art of warfare through sheer brutal practice. And then, 50 years ago, they had finally achieved peace among themselves. They had formed the Terran Defense Coalition, a loose alliance of nations and colonies united for mutual protection. But they never forgot their lessons. They kept their weapons. They maintained their fleets. They drilled constantly, preparing for external threats. The Krenthax had been the first alien species to test humanity's defenses. They had not been the threat humanity was prepared to face. They had simply been the first. When Pelrin presented her findings to the conclave, the silence in the chamber was absolute. They are not conquerors, she concluded. They are survivors. And survivors fight hardest when cornered. The High Counselor made his decision. Send an emissary, under a flag of truce. Let us see if these survivors can be reasoned with. Ambassador Thelcaris had served the Krenthax Empire for 40 years. She had negotiated trade agreements with species across 3 sectors. She had mediated conflicts between rival colonies. She had even helped draft the surrender terms for a dozen conquered worlds. But she had never felt this nervous about a mission. Her ship, a small diplomatic vessel painted in the white and gold colors of truce, approached the human territorial boundary at a carefully slow speed. Every sensor was broadcasting their peaceful intentions. Every communication channel carried messages of diplomatic greeting. Thelcaris wanted to make absolutely certain that the humans understood she was not a threat. The response came quickly. A voice transmission, male this time, with a slight accent that Thelcaris's translator struggled to identify. Krenthax vessel, this is Terran Defense Station Sentinel. We've received your diplomatic credentials. You're cleared to proceed to coordinates being transmitted now. A patrol ship will escort you to the diplomatic facility. Do not deviate from the provided course. Do not activate any weapon systems. Welcome to human space, Ambassador. Acknowledged, Sentinel, Thelcaris replied. We will comply with all instructions. The escort ship that met them was smaller than the Indomitable, but it still made Thelcaris's security detail nervous. It was sleek and dark, bristling with weapon emplacements that tracked her vessel with unnerving precision. But it made no hostile moves, simply falling into formation alongside the diplomatic ship and matching its course. As they traveled deeper into human territory, Thelcaris observed everything. The humans had dozens of space stations scattered throughout their system. Some were clearly military installations, their sensor arrays and weapon batteries obvious even from a distance. Others appeared to be industrial facilities, massive shipyards where new vessels took shape. Still others seemed to be civilian habitats, rotating cylinders where lights glowed in what looked like cities. What struck Thelcaris most was the variety. The stations didn't follow a single design philosophy. Each seemed unique, built by different entities with different purposes. It was chaotic in a way that made the organized uniformity of Krenthax space seem sterile by comparison. Ambassador, her pilot said quietly, I'm detecting multiple governments broadcasting from different stations. The humans don't appear to have a unified political structure. Thelcaris frowned. That shouldn't be possible. How can they coordinate military action without central authority? I don't know, Ambassador. But there are at least 7 distinct administrations claiming jurisdiction over various territories. They seem to operate through some kind of alliance framework rather than a single empire. It was fascinating and confusing. The Krenthax Empire was exactly that. An empire with clear hierarchies and unified command. These humans seemed to exist in a state of organized chaos, multiple factions somehow coexisting and cooperating, despite having separate governments. The diplomatic facility turned out to be a massive station orbiting Earth's moon. As Thelkaris' ship docked, she could see other alien vessels in nearby bays. Some she recognized as independent traders who operated in neutral space. Others were completely unfamiliar. The humans apparently welcomed multiple species to their territory, despite their military strength. A human delegation met her at the airlock. They were smaller than Krenthax, bipedal with only 2 eyes and no facial ridges. Their leader, a man with gray hair and a formal suit, extended his hand in what Thelkaris had learned was a greeting gesture. "Ambassador Thelkaris, I'm Secretary Zhao Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. On behalf of the Terran Defense Coalition, welcome to Luna Station." Thelkaris carefully mimicked the handshake. "Thank you, Secretary. I appreciate your willingness to meet with us after our unfortunate first encounter." "Well, your fleet did fire first," Secretary Zhao said mildly. "But we understand that mistakes happen. Please follow me. The Council is waiting." The interior of Luna Station was as chaotic as its exterior. Humans moved through corridors alongside robots and what appeared to be artificial intelligence constructs, housed in mechanical bodies. Signs in dozens of languages pointed to different sections. The architecture seemed to blend multiple styles, as if the station had been built in sections over many years. Secretary Zhao led her to a conference room with a large window overlooking Earth. The planet was beautiful, blue and green and white wrapped in swirling clouds. Thelkaris found herself staring at it, wondering what kind of world had produced such formidable warriors. The Terran Defense Council consisted of representatives from the major human governments. They introduced themselves one by one. North American Union, European Federation, Asian Cooperative, African Alliance, South American states. Each had their own authority, their own territory, their own military forces. Yet they all answered to this council when it came to defending their species. And sitting quietly at the far end of the table, wearing a crisp naval uniform, was Captain Sarah Chen. "You," Thelkaris said before she could stop herself. Captain Chen smiled. "Hello, Ambassador. I hope there are no hard feelings about our previous meeting." Commander Zarketh was very persistent. Thelkaris settled into her chair, trying to regain her diplomatic composure. Captain Chen's actions were entirely defensive. "We acknowledge that our military commander acted hastily and without proper intelligence." "That's a polite way of saying he attacked without knowing what he was facing," one of the council members said, a woman from the European Federation, her nameplate reading Director Kowalski. "But we appreciate the honesty. Now, what brings the Krenthax Empire to our sector?" This was the delicate part. Thelkaris had to convey the Empire's position without seeming weak or appearing to threaten. "The Krenthax Empire has existed for 3 millennia, she began. "We have brought order and civilization to hundreds of worlds. When we detected your transmissions, we assumed you were a young species in need of guidance. We now understand that assumption was incorrect." "Very incorrect," Captain Chen murmured. "The Empire wishes to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. We propose a non-aggression pact, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges. We believe both our peoples can benefit from peaceful coexistence." Secretary Zhao leaned forward. "And if we refuse? Then we remain at our respective borders and have no further contact. The Empire has no desire for continued conflict with a species as capable as yours." "What about your expansion?" Director Kowalski asked. "The Krenthax Empire is known for absorbing other species into its structure. How do we know you won't try again once you've rebuilt your fleet?" Thelkaris chose her words carefully. "The Empire grows through willing association and mutual benefit. When we encounter species who prefer independence, we respect that choice. Humanity has clearly demonstrated both the capability and will to maintain its sovereignty. We would not challenge that again." It was a diplomatic way of saying the Empire was afraid of them, but everyone in the room understood the subtext. The council members exchanged glances. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. Finally, Secretary Zhao spoke. "We'll need to discuss this among ourselves. In the meantime, would you like a tour of our facilities? It might help you understand humanity better." "I would be honored," Thelkaris replied. Over the next several days, Captain Chen personally escorted Thelkaris through various human installations. They visited research stations where scientists from different nations worked side by side on experimental technologies. They toured a shipyard where massive vessels took shape, constructed by corporations under government contract. They even spent time on Earth itself, walking through cities that seemed to exist in a constant state of controlled chaos. Thelkaris asked questions constantly. How did they coordinate so many different governments? How did they prevent conflicts between rival factions? How did they manage to unite for common defense while maintaining separate authorities?
Captain Chen's answers were illuminating.
The humans had learned through painful experience. They had fought devastating wars against each other. They had nearly destroyed their own civilization multiple times. But each conflict taught them lessons. Each peace was built on the ashes of the last war. Eventually, they developed systems of cooperation, born from the absolute necessity of survival. We're not united because we like each other, Captain Chen explained one evening over dinner. We're united because we learned that the alternative is extinction. When you face that choice enough times, you find ways to work together. But you still maintain separate militaries, Thelkaris observed. You still have different governments. Doesn't that create inefficiency? Sometimes, Captain Chen admitted, but it also creates redundancy. If one government fails, others continue. If one military doctrine proves ineffective, others can adapt. Diversity makes us resilient. Unity makes us strong. We've learned to balance both. On the final day of the tour, Captain Chen took Thelkaris to a shipyard orbiting Mars. There, in various stages of construction, sat dozens of massive warships. Each one was larger than the Indomitable, their hulls studded with weapon emplacements and armored with materials that Thelkaris's scanner couldn't identify. Sovereign-class battleships, Captain Chen said proudly. Next-generation defense platforms. We're building 50 of them, just to be safe. The treaty signing ceremony took place on Luna Station, 2 weeks after Thelkaris's arrival. Representatives from every major human government attended, along with delegations from the Krenthax High Conclave, transmitted via real-time holographic link. It was a historic moment, the first formal diplomatic agreement between humanity and an interstellar empire. Thelkaris signed the documents with a steady hand, though her mind churned with thoughts about what this treaty truly meant. The Krenthax Empire was acknowledging, officially and publicly, that another species existed as their equal. It was unprecedented in 3,000 years of imperial history. After the ceremony, as the various delegations dispersed and the diplomatic staff began celebrations, Thelkaris found herself standing alone at the observation window, looking down at Earth. The planet seemed peaceful from this distance, its wars and conflicts invisible beneath the clouds and oceans. Beautiful, isn't it? Thelkaris turned to find Captain Chen approaching with 2 glasses of something amber and bubbling. Champagne, the captain explained, offering 1 glass. Old Earth tradition. We drink it to celebrate important occasions. Thelkaris accepted the glass carefully. Your world does seem remarkably peaceful from up here. From up here, yes. Captain Chen joined her at the window. But down there, we've still got disputes over territory, arguments about resources, political conflicts that sometimes get heated. We're not perfect. We're just trying to be better than we were. May I ask you something? Thelkaris said, of course. That day when you faced Commander Zarketh's fleet, you could have destroyed them all in the first minutes, couldn't you? Everything you did, it was measured, controlled. You were holding back. Captain Chen took a sip of her champagne. We could have, yes. The Indomitable alone had the firepower to eliminate that entire fleet in under 10 minutes. But that would have been slaughter, not defense. We disabled what we had to, destroyed what we couldn't safely disable, and let the survivors flee. We wanted to send a message, not commit genocide. Why show such mercy to an enemy who attacked you? Because we've learned something important through our history. Today's enemy might be tomorrow's ally. Today's war might become tomorrow's regret. We've fought enough wars to know that excessive violence creates cycles of revenge that can last generations. Captain Chen turned to face Thelkaris directly. Your empire attacked us out of ignorance and arrogance. But you weren't trying to exterminate us. You thought you were bringing order to primitives. Wrong, yes. Insulting, absolutely. But not evil. So we defended ourselves, proved our point, and gave you a chance to walk away. And if we had refused? If Commander Zarketh had continued the attack? Captain Chen's expression hardened slightly. Then we would have done what was necessary. Make no mistake, Ambassador. We're capable of tremendous violence when required, but we choose not to use it unless we must. That choice is what separates defense from aggression. Thelkaris thought about the scarred hull of the Indomitable, the evidence of countless battles. Your ship. The damage it carried. What wars gave it those scars? Pirate raids, mostly. Some conflicts with aggressive species in neighboring sectors. One particularly nasty encounter with an automated defense network left over from some extinct civilization. The Indomitable has been in service for 20 years. She's seen her share of action. And those new battleships in the shipyard? The Sovereign class? They're our answer to the question, what if we meet something even worse? We hope we never need them for their intended purpose, but hope isn't a strategy. Preparation is. A thought occurred to Thelkaris. Captain, may I ask you a difficult question? You can ask. I'll decide if I want to answer. If your species is so advanced, so powerful, why haven't you expanded? Why remain in your single system when you could claim territory across multiple sectors? Captain Chen was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Earth with an expression that seemed equal parts pride and sadness. Because we remember what it cost us to get here, she finally said. Every technology we have, every weapon system, every tactical doctrine we paid for in blood. Our own blood. Human blood. We fought wars that killed hundreds of millions of people. We developed weapons that could sterilize entire planets. We came within hours of destroying our own civilization more than once. She paused, taking another sip of champagne. 50 years ago, we finally achieved global peace. Not because we ran out of reasons to fight, but because we collectively decided that survival was more important than victory. We formed the Terran Defense Coalition as a way to protect ourselves without repeating the mistakes that nearly destroyed us. And part of that decision was choosing not to become conquerors. But you could, Thelkaris said. With your technology, your weapons, you could establish an empire that would dwarf ours. Yes, we could. And that's exactly why we won't. We've learned something that took us 10,000 years of warfare to understand. Power doesn't require domination. Strength doesn't demand conquest. The most dangerous thing you can do is give weapons to a species that hasn't learned when not to use them. Captain Chen turned to face Thelkaris fully, and her eyes were intense. We've spent our entire history learning how to kill each other efficiently. We got very, very good at it, but in the last 50 years we've been learning something harder. How to not kill each other, how to cooperate despite our differences, how to find strength in diversity rather than uniformity. That learning is still fragile, still new. The last thing we want is to start fighting again, even against someone else. But you will fight if necessary, Thelkaris said. It wasn't a question. Absolutely. We'll defend ourselves. We'll protect our allies. We'll stand against genuine threats. But we won't start wars of conquest. We won't subjugate other species. We won't become the thing we spent so long fighting against. She gestured toward the shipyard visible through the window. Those battleships aren't there to conquer anyone. They're there to make sure no one conquers us. There's a difference. Thelkaris thought about the Krenthax Empire's long history of expansion. How many species had they absorbed? How many cultures had been erased or assimilated? At the time it had seemed like bringing order to chaos, but now standing here with this human captain, she wondered if her people had been the chaos all along. I should return to my ship, Thelkaris said quietly. I need to report back to the conclave. Before you go, Captain Chen said, I want you to understand something. This treaty we just signed, it's more than just an agreement between our governments. It's a choice. You chose to talk instead of fight. We chose to accept that choice rather than hold a grudge. Both of our peoples are deciding to try something different. And if it fails, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'd rather try for peace and fail than not try at all. Wouldn't you? Thelkaris considered the question. The old Krenthax Empire, the one that had conquered 1,000 worlds, would never have asked that question. They would have simply taken what they wanted and crushed any resistance. But that empire had met humanity and learned it wasn't invincible. Yes, Thelkaris said finally, I would rather try. They finished their champagne in comfortable silence, watching Earth rotate slowly below them. Several weeks later, Thelkaris stood before the High Conclave once more. This time she wasn't there to witness someone else's judgment. She was there to deliver her final report on humanity. They are not conquerors, she began, echoing the words Pelrin had used months ago. But they are not pacifists either. They are a species that has learned warfare's true cost and chosen to pursue peace, while maintaining the capacity for violence. She presented her findings. The diversity of human governments, their history of conflicts and cooperation, their advanced technology born from desperate innovation, their decision to defend rather than expand. They frighten me, Delcaris admitted, not because of their weapons, though those are formidable, but because they represent something we've never encountered. A species that could conquer but chooses not to. A civilization that learned to restrain its own worst impulses. What do you recommend? The High Counselor asked. I recommend we honor the treaty in both letter and spirit. I recommend we learn from their example. And I recommend we never, ever give them a reason to reconsider their choice to be peaceful. The conclave deliberated for hours. Finally, they reached a decision. The treaty would stand. The Empire would maintain peaceful relations with humanity. And perhaps in time the Krenthax could learn something from these strange, scarred survivors who had turned their backs on conquest. Commander Zarketh, who had been quietly rehabilitated and given a position in fleet logistics, watched the proceedings from the gallery. He thought about the Indomitable, about Captain Chen's calm voice in the midst of battle, about the way humanity had chosen mercy when they could have chosen annihilation. The galaxy had changed the day the Krenthax met humanity, not because of conquest or war or the rise of a new empire, but because two species had looked at each other across the void and decided that understanding was better than destruction. It was a small choice in the grand scale of the universe. But it was a beginning, and sometimes a beginning is enough.